Before I start with my presentation, I better say a few words about our department. I work in the Department of Information Studies, and we provide postgraduate training and education for archivists, records managers, publishers, librarians, and information scientists. And these are all professions which are profoundly affected and profoundly anxious about the transition from a print-based economy to one that is now we're very much fast-forwarding into the virtual space. And we feel that something really big is happening. Now, within the department, I work with David Nicholas in a research group called CIBER. It doesn't really matter what CIBER stands for, because I'm not sure we can even remember. But the key thing is the IB in the middle of that research group, information behaviour. Now, I come from a science background, and my natural tendency is to go looking for evidence, for hard data, and then from that data to start thinking about its implications and start to think about what it actually means. And we've been kind of running a campaign with publishers over the last 5 years to try to embed the idea that publishing, and in fact not just publishing, but media in general, needs to become very much more evidence-based. So we've been using the phrase evidence-based publishing as a way of trying to get people to understand what we're doing. Now, I'm going to be talking about some of our data collection and some of the implications that we think this has in terms of the way that we understand reading and the way that we understand how people interact with digital services. But towards the end, I actually want to invite you as members of this audience to take part in what we think is one of the biggest experiments in online reading that we've ever done. So we were working with the BBC on what's effectively a big experiment on online reading and how people use search engines. Well, how do we do this? In many ways, a lot of the work that David and I do could be regarded as trying to read the tea leaves in the bottom of the cup when people like us engage in some kind of search activity. Maybe we go onto the web to find out about our health, or we go onto the web to help us to help our kids do a homework assignment. Every time we go onto the web and use a web-based service, whether that's over a mobile device, an iPhone, a smartphone, or a laptop like this one, we leave a very detailed trace of what we've been doing. Okay, and this is where the idea of reading the tea leaves comes from. Just reflect on this for a moment. If I asked you individually how you'd use the web yesterday, or even this morning, would you be able to remember in any detail what you'd actually done? I get a sense that when we go onto the internet, we leave our memories behind. And it's quite interesting when you look at your browser record and see what you've actually done. Now, this is an example of a very simple example of a server log. Effectively, this is a set of digital fingerprints that you leave behind when you interact with Google or a health database or anything else. And from this, we can see not what people think they've done when they've been online, not what they think they would like to tell the interviewer, but in fact, in detail, what they have done when they've been online. So we can tell where they're based in terms of their IP address, although we usually hash that for reasons of anonymity. We can see which browser software they're using, whether they've come to this particular site directly from a bookmark, or whether they've Googled their way in, or whether they've come in through a hyperlink from another site, how long they've spent, how many pages they've looked at, what kinds of functions they've invoked during that session. What this does, it gives us huge amounts of very granular detail of the reality of what people do when they're online. Now, in a few moments, I'm going to be giving a kind of a very almost simplistic view of the kinds of behaviours that we're seeing online. But I will stress that we weren't able to do these kinds of experiments in the print era. It was almost impossible to measure and map and understand reading in the pre-digital era. So some of the things that we're going to pull out of this, are they completely new and unique forms of reading in the virtual space, or are they accelerations, enhancements of trends that are already taking place in the print world? Well, in very broad terms, we've been doing this for about 10 years now. We've looked at a whole variety of different kinds of digital service. And this is what we see, this is our interpretation of what we see in those digital tea leaves. A real sense of impatience. When you look at the logs, you get a sense that people are clicking and clicking and clicking. People tend to spend very short periods of time in any one particular web resource. They kind of skitter across the surface of many different resources very, very rapidly. It's a bit like channel hopping. My daughter, who is a Google generation teenager, was watching TV a few weeks ago. She had the remote control, and because we've got cable TV with 160 channels, she was going from channel to channel to channel. I said, Hannah, for goodness sake, can't you make up your mind what you're watching? And the answer came back, Dad, I'm watching all of it. And you get this real sense in the logs that we are channel hopping, we're flicking our remote controls, and we're trying to read everything at the same time. We've done a lot of work, not just with, we work mostly with scholarly publishers on journals, use of scholarly content. We've done a lot of work recently on ebooks. And what's very interesting and notable about student use of ebooks is that they spend more time navigating around the site rather than actually viewing the content. So they spend time, most of the time will be spent looking at the contents pages, looking at indices, looking at summaries at the beginning of the chapters. And very little time, and actually rather little downloading, to suggest they're actually reading in the sense that we understood reading in the print era. So we spend our time travelling rather than actually arriving at the destination. Now we've come up with a notion called power browsing, and it's to do with this sense of extreme impatience, especially amongst males, especially amongst younger males, this sense of click, 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 click across the surface. And we've got some reasonably compelling evidence that the nature of reading online is different from certainly what we imagined the nature of reading to be in the physical environment. People spend their time looking intensively at the metadata, at the contents pages, at the indices, at the titles, at the abstracts, but not at the full text. And we've spoken to many scientists at University College London, and one of them said to me, well, I go online to avoid reading. And what we think is emerging is a sense of all this apparatus which has been produced by librarians and publishers to make it easier to find and discover material is now actually become the end point in itself. Information osmosis, we know that people download material, they squirrel lots of PDFs away on their laptops. But we are pretty sure that much of that is not actually opened again. It's a sense of it's there, so it will somehow become absorbed. Now, the previous speaker mentioned Nicholas Carr, and we think there's some our empirical stuff around this notion of pair browsing, rapid skimming, channel hopping, does actually fit quite well with some of Nicholas Carr's arguments. And you can see here from his insight that he feels quite anxious now about reading in this sort of post-print world. And indeed, some of my students come to me and they say, I'm actually rather intimidated now by having to face reading a whole book. What can I do about it? Now, I'm not sure if I'm an optimist or a pessimist. You could look at the data that we've created and you could think, this is dumbing down. We're losing the ability to really engage in the way that we thought we used to with print. We're becoming impatient, we're becoming distracted. That's the glass half empty. However, could it be that a new form of strategic reading is emerging where we are becoming much more efficient at using these kinds of electronic tools? We're becoming much more effective at browsing and synthesizing information. We were asked to do a scoping study for the British Library on the Google generation. The Google generation are those young people who are born, like my daughter, Hannah, after 1993. And this is a generation for whom there is no memory of that pre-internet world. My daughter's been brought up in a household of full-on, high-speed, interactive, broadband, multi-channel TVs and so on. The British Library were really interested in how do you develop a forward strategy, 5-year strategy for the British Library when my daughter's generation will be beginning to hit the shelves of the British Library in around the year 2013. So the British Library are interested in trying to get some insight into the nature of that generation, whether the digital native generation is in some way quantitatively, qualitatively different from old people like myself. And we did a short study. It became quite big news in the UK because some of the findings that we found were perhaps counterintuitive. We did a huge critical review of the published literature over the last 30 years. We looked at how, maybe say 20 years ago, how were researchers reporting on the information behaviour of young people at a point in time where perhaps we just got the first CD-ROMs. And we did some deep log analysis. Here we've got people from 3 different generations, the Google generation person being on the right. And we exposed them to we asked them to go and look at the same website. In fact, these were 2 websites produced by the British Library and by GISC, which are aimed at school kids, but of course they're also used by their parents and their grandparents to help them with their homework. And we looked at how each of these generations was interacting with the same web platform at the same point in time. And I tried to triangulate an understanding of where young people were perhaps different. Well, the kinds of things that emerged from this study were that the information literacy of young people hasn't improved. It's been problematic for the last 30 years. It's problematic in the internet era, but it was equally problematic in the earlier days of electronic systems such as CD-ROMs. And I think because we see young people using technology and they appear to be very facile with the use of technology, we can easily align that with a sense that perhaps they have better information skills than we do. Again, we return to this notion of speed. The speed of interaction with electronic services is really so rapid that we do not believe that any serious or much serious time is spent evaluating information for relevance, accuracy, or authority. And we know from many, many studies over the last 30 years of the search formulation of young people that they find it quite difficult to express their ideas in ways that are amenable to finding information in a computer environment. Some really fascinating research was done in some schools in Wales where they simply asked young people aged 9 and 10 to draw a mental map of the internet. Now, I suspect if I asked people in this audience to draw a mental map, it would probably take the form of something like a spider's web or a ball of wool. But the young people were tending to draw mental maps where Google was a big box, a big square box. And inside that big square box were information entities that were provided by Google. And Google was their friend. When you talk to the young children, they understood Google to be their friend. They anthropomorphized Google. They thought it was an intelligent person that understood and empathized with their information needs. And I think it's for those reasons, amongst many other, that it's become that things like Google, Yahoo have become so huge primary brands for young people. And of course, these have got huge implications for people in my department who design and help to design and evaluate things like interfaces to digital libraries. We've really got to start thinking about how users actually do interact with these systems. The trouble is, although those remarks are aimed at our young people in the UK, the characteristics of power browsing, of channel hopping, all the rest of it, equally apply to professors emeriti at University College. We're all Google generation now. We're all using Google as the primary means of addressing information overload. It's our primary coping mechanism. Now finally, because I've been shown the yellow card, we are now working on a huge experiment with BBC Lab UK in the UK. And to pick up a theme from the previous end of the previous talk, we're working with psychologists at Stanford, and we've developed an online, very fun online experiment where we're trying to get to collect lots and lots of metrics about, for instance, if you go onto the test, and I'll show you the link in a moment, if you go onto the test, we'll be measuring your working memory, measuring your ability to do different things at the same time. But in the same context, we're also asking you questions about your health and giving you sort of simulated Google experiences where we're trying to get to a set of metrics that will say, are you the sort of person that goes straight to the top of the Google postings list? Because that would imply to us implicit trust in the search engine. We've got lots and lots of little things which I can't tell you about now because it would prejudice the experiment. But these include, we're measuring the extent to which people cut and paste. So it's really a big-scale information retrieval, Google-style experiment. And for us, the most exciting thing of all is purely by accident, I gave a presentation rather like this to colleagues at University College. And we're now going to be working with some neuroscientists, because one of the key things that we're beginning to, one of the key questions that's being asked is whether this intensive immersion in digital tools like Facebook or the rest of it? Is it rewiring our minds? And what we're doing with the neurologists is we have 300 volunteers who have had their brains scanned into a three-dimensional database. And we're going to get those volunteers to take part in the experiment, which is this one. That's the URL. If you Google BBC web animals, that's number one on the hit list. And what we're going to be doing is to look at the differences, individual differences in brain structures amongst those 300 volunteers and compare that with the results of this test. And I think this may begin to move us towards some kind of neurological basis for trying to understand the very different kinds of web behaviors that we see in our log experiments. Thank you very much.